Hey everyone, how's it going? Hope you're all doing great. As I always say, the sun just came out around where I live, so it was just a good shot in the arm, so I figured why not have a video today. In this video, I got some pretty cool stories for you, so pull up a stump, and yeah, thank you for watching, and let's jump into it. This story happened to my grandfather. It was sometime around the 1940s, I believe, and this happened in the Deep South. And as you can imagine, there's wild country bumpkins as far as the eye can see. There's this huge tree just north of my grandpa's hometown. A local legend there claims that the tree is haunted by a large man on a black horse. People have been said to make pacts with it. Others leave little offerings, like something small, hoping to gain favor from the tall man. My grandpa decides to make a deal with the evil spirit one day. I won't go into detail, but my grandpa was an orphan and his life was really rough and pretty bad. So my grandpa goes to the tree. As the man on a horse steps out of it, almost like the tree was liquid instead of solid. The man is huge and his face looks all puffy and blue like when someone drowns. Grandpa tells his story to the man. He pleads with him and tells him that he's starving, that he can't find work, and he has no money, how he's lonely and wishes he had a family of his own. So the man on the horse tells Grandpa to travel to a neighboring town, that he'll meet a woman there with lots of money. They will fall in love and get married, and with her money they'll be able to buy a farm. He said further that the farm will earn them a decent living and that it will stay in the family, but two of his sons will leave for the city and go on to become educated men. Grandpa will live to see them prosper and become important people. But there's one thing that he needs to do. There's a cave outside the town that belongs to the man on the horse. My grandpa needs to stop there on his way to the next town. He needs to go in and write his name on the cave wall in his own blood. Then everything will happen just like the man on the horse said. My grandpa thanks him and he leaves for the neighboring town. On the way, he finds the cave that the man on the horse told him about. He goes inside and finds the walls covered in names written in blood. He pricks his finger and signs the wall as well. Then he leaves. To make a long story short, my grandpa met my grandmother, whose family was really wealthy. She and my grandpa bought a farm and made a good deal of money and raised my dad and his brothers there. Several years before I was born, Grandpa woke up to find the man on the horse standing by his bed, but this time there was no horse, it was just him. The man told Grandpa that he would soon be a grandfather and that his grandsons would prosper just like he had promised. But in the 35th year of his life, the youngest boy will be mine. And then he faded away. I'm the youngest of my dad's sons. My grandpa used to tell me this story and chuckle. He'd say there was nothing to worry about. He'd remind me that the name he signed on the cave wall wasn't his real name. After he'd been orphaned, one of the families in his hometown took him in for a bit. The name they'd given him was the name he'd written on the wall, so I'm sure you have nothing to worry about. Then he'd pretend to look confused and ask, "How old are you now?" I'd tell him and he'd nod dramatically and say, "Yes, I'm sure you'll be fine." I know this was just probably a bedtime story that my grandpa used to tell me to scare me, but the old man certainly made it sound real. I'm 25 now and it still really spooks me to imagine that he was telling the truth. I've dug up some photos of the time that I visited his farm and hometown. I don't have a scanner, so the quality isn't very good, but this enormous tree near my grandpa's farm is the exact same type of tree from his story. The perspective is bad because I was 13 when I took it, and I was trying to be artsy. But it was much taller than a house, and you couldn't even wrap your arms halfway around the trunk. So all that being said, I guess I'll eventually find out if my grandpa was telling the truth or not. It's the 4th of July, and my Uncle Mickey's death is really burning in my brain. I caught my dad crying in his room this morning over it, so Anyone want to share military stories? I'll start with my uncles. FYI, I'm not actually that knowledgeable about military stuff, so forgive me if I say anything kinda stupid. And yeah, here we go. My uncle was in 11C Airborne apparently, and he did tours in Kuwait and Panama. He got married, but he had serious trouble readjusting to civilian life, and the marriage fell apart. After that, my uncle hit a downward spiral. Dad said he was taking it really awful for a while, and everyone was worried he'd eventually off himself. His son, my cousin, ultimately joined the military too. He was even worse than my uncle at one point. My cousin attempted suicide and ended up hospitalized with TBI and PTSD. This screwed up my uncle more than he already was, but he obviously couldn't kill himself since he had kids, so he had to figure out other ways of dealing with his issues. On a personal note, he was a great uncle to me. Even with how clearly troubled he was, I've never met a more compassionate man in my entire life. Anyway, after my cousin's attempted suicide, my uncle somehow manages to meet a woman, and he remarried. Also started learning carpentry, and he was building houses to keep himself sane. But he's always in excruciating pain from military injuries, his knees and his back. He's told that if he doesn't get surgery, he'll be paralyzed by the end of the year, but the VA has been jerking him around with benefits, so he can't afford a surgery. The thought of becoming paralyzed really screws with him. He hits a new downward spiral, and just before his death, his behavior becomes seriously erratic. So my uncle always kept this pistol on him. Some nights he, my aunt, and my cousin will be eating dinner, and my uncle will pull out the pistol and hold it to his head. My aunt and my cousin freak out and tell him to put the gun down, but the uncle doesn't seem to hear them, and he does this a lot. So one day my cousin comes home early, and he's being quiet in case my uncle's asleep, but he hears my uncle talking in his room, and he listens. It sounds like he's having a conversation with someone, and my cousin assumes he's on the phone. But he overhears, "You're gonna make me do it. I don't want to. I love my family," or something along those lines. My cousin's really concerned and knocks on my uncle's door and opens it. He's just sitting on the edge of the bed with no phone. And he asks, "Who are you talking to?" He says, "Nobody, just leave me alone." My cousin tells my mom and dad about this and mentions how sometimes his eyes will glaze over and he'll put a gun to his head. So fast forward, my uncle was in the garden, and my aunt comes home. She says something to him, it's not really clear what exactly, but my uncle follows her into the house and he tells her, "I killed a man." She says, "What are you talking about?" He just repeats the same thing, "I killed a man," and walks to his room where his gun is. He walks back out of the room holding the gun up in the air and says, "I killed him and he won't leave me alone." My aunt freaks out and starts screaming, thinking my uncle's going to kill her. My uncle puts the gun under his chin and pulls the trigger. Before he does this, he says something to my aunt, and she never tells anybody what it is. Only thing she ever said to my dad was, "I don't think that it was him that pulled the trigger." The funeral was held after COVID hit, and my uncle couldn't have the full military honors he should have had. We couldn't invite friends or even much family, but they played taps, and my dad and cousin, both also military, folded the flag. We sang Amazing Grace and Dad cried. His eyes were so far away as he sang. He looked the same way this morning when I found him crying. Like I said, I'm not a military guy, but this shit really drove home the fact that some soldiers don't leave the war. It doesn't end for them, even when it's supposed to be over. So, does anybody have stories? I just kinda want to feel like I'm not the only one here. When I was 12 years old, I attended a Catholic school with a playground that had lots of trees, like a little forest. I got detention one day and two of my friends stayed with me to rake leaves in the forest. It's now 6-ish p.m. and we're almost done, so we start playing around and throwing pebbles at each other. I see one of my friends hiding behind a tree and grab a fistful of gunk to shove it down his pants. As I approach him, I hear my two friends call out to me, and I'm really weirded out because the only people left at school are a couple of teachers and the basketball team. I turn around and start hearing leaves rustling behind me, and I make a run for it. I spot my two friends and yell for help. One starts running away, and the other looks like he's going to crap his pants. I don't look back and keep running, eventually catching up to him, and I pull him by the arm to come with me. The other kid starts yelling and crying for help. The basketball team and the gym teacher run over to me, and I black out from fear and exhaustion. I wake up in the arms of some teacher, and I get laid down in the infirmary bed. My head is throbbing, and I ask for water, but the teacher leaves me there alone and just gets back outside. My mom and dad come pick me up, and then my dad stays in school while my mother drives me back home. Monday comes, and everyone is talking about what happened. The kid that pooped his pants didn't come to school. I asked around, and another friend told me that he was sick. I get called to the mother principal's office, along with the kid who ran away. My mom and his dad are there too. The nun starts apologizing to both their parents and almost begs them not to sue. I'm in the dark up to that point because my parents had asked me what happened over the weekend and wouldn't answer my questions, just comfort me and let me sleep in their bed. The guy goes on a rant about how he pays good money for his son to go there and blah blah blah. Mom and I are asked to step outside for a moment, and then we go back in. The nun says she's going to ask us what happened. I tell her my version, and she turns to the other kid and asks if he'd like to share. The kid is visibly shaken up, but starts talking. His version of events goes like this. He says that I got separated from the other two boys, and then they heard me scream as I made my way up the little hill. He saw a face staring back at them, popping up behind a tree. He says that he then saw the thing start coming up behind the tree and he started to run. He says it looked all black except for the face, which could have just been like the sun or something. The nun asked him to draw the face, and the kid draws some Picasso-looking thing. It has a massive mouth and these weird slits for eyes, and the proportions are just all wrong. Mother What's-Her-Name says that that'll be all for today, and that we can return to our classrooms. My mom kisses me goodbye and asks me to eat lunch inside instead of playing outside. I play outside anyways. The forest has people cutting down trees and yellow tape around it. I stay near the basketball court, eating lunch with the other kid, and there's a bunch of kids that want to hear my story, and they ask dumb stuff like, was it Slender Man? We both exaggerate our stories, and they are amazed. A couple of days go by, it's now Thursday, and the kid who pooped his pants shows up, and he looks fine now. I go up to him and I asked him why he didn't come to school. He said that he's changing schools. I asked him what happened after I fainted. He says he kept staring at the forest and describes the same weird monster that my other friend drew. He says the thing just kept staring back at him even when people came to take us away. I asked the gym teacher what happened that day, and he says he didn't see anything, especially not at the forest, but since both of my friends' stories matched up describing the weird thing, the mother principal got really upset and is having the trees gone for good. I get sad because I really liked the woods. I loved climbing trees and exploring and stuff. After this, things returned to normal. The kid's dad didn't sue. My parents take me out from there and they let me attend a regular school. I never know what happened. My mom brushes it off as kids being kids. I'm 22 now, and I found out my dad was really into the occult and that we have similar interests because I've been reading Practicing since 20. He says it's the weirdest stuff he's ever seen because He couldn't have been lying since the kids saw the same thing. He says he thinks that we could have saw an egregore that we materialized with our collective mischief, but the mother was convinced that it was a demon, and that's why she had the forest cut down. So, what did you think of those stories? Do you think they were real, or do you think they were fake? Do you think they were somewhere in between? Let me know down in the comments. And, as always, if you have any stories or experiences of your own that you would like to see in a video, then you can email me at the email in the description there. And if you have any, suggestions for a video, that'd be great too to hear in the comments. I've got the Dyatlov Pass, or however you say it, and I got a few other ones that I'm looking into, so it's been great. And yeah, hope you enjoyed the video, and I will catch you in the next one. Thank you for watching.